This conference will now be recorded.
I will call the meeting to order at 3:30. Roll call, please, Susie.
I have Leroy Vogt.
Here.
Dale Schmitz.
Here.
Tracy Fluke.
Here.
Kyle Jago.
Here.
Jessica Atkinson is excused, as is Annette Oppinger.
Okay. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Action on the minutes from the September 13th Bike Ped Committee meeting. Any comments, any corrections? If not, then I would ask for a motion for approval.
I have a motion to approve. I read them. I didn't see them.
Second by Leroy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Just throwing vehicles pass through. Motion carried. All right, comments from the public. Any comments from the public? I don't think anybody's online. I'll just say it one more time. Any comments from the public?
Tracy, did we miss the action on the agenda?
Yeah, we did. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Dang it. Okay, go backwards. Action on the agenda, please. Any changes anyone wants to make the agenda? Good catch, Susie. Anybody that's here for staff that wants something moved up so they get out of here sooner?
It's a fight.
Time once, twice, there's
Motion to accept.
okay. Second by Leroy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, got the agenda set. And comments from the public, we did not have any. Site plan review. Kyle, anything on site plan review?
Well, there were two things. There was a revised plan on the Mission Grill property, which is across from Nativity. And I just stated that, they showed bike parking, I think, and I wanted the APBB parking, just clarify that.
Okay.
And then the other one, and it looks like we'll be discussing that later, was the Bellin property.
Okay.
And I did make some recommendations, but maybe we'll discuss those later.
Yep, that sounds good.
I think just as a point of note, sorry to jump in, I believe the Mission Grill property also had sidewalk.
Yeah.
Which we don't currently have, so that would help out with that connection. So really then the only piece that's left is, excuse.
So sidewalks were added on the Cormier side or United Street side? Because United has them, right?
On the Cormier side.
Cormier side, so how do you have to help me?
Yep. So then there's only one more piece of property to complete that sidewalk stretch. Needed after this one.
So there wasn't a sidewalk there at all before, right? Or was there a piece of one? So
No,
then
there
that
was
was part of the requirement for that development to go in with
They
add
voluntarily put that in.
that sidewalk in.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, it is.
I believe that's in our, I say that because I believe that's in our bike and ped plan.
Yeah, I thought it was too. On the south side of Cormier. Okay. Anything else, Kyle, from
No,
site
no.
plan? No? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get into 8 action items. 8A is discussion on role of the committee related to administrative, quasi-judicial, and legislative action items. And Joel, I believe you're the one that's going to take this one.
Thanks, Tracy. Again, I just wanted to mention, I just realized the formatting on here kind of looks a little goofy. It converts from our minute track into this. You can't get too funky with the formatting, otherwise it starts breaking down paragraphs and things like that. So if it was a little difficult to read because of that, I apologize. I did not realize that. Looked good on my screen, but apparently when you print it out, it doesn't format as well. In any event, we wanted to have this conversation as it relates to typical action items that committees like the Bike and Ped Committee and maybe some of the other committees may undertake within a local unit of government. And really the basis behind this conversation is there are at times where I feel like the committee may struggle with its role and the success it may have with a variety of different topics related to bike and ped. We've had a lot of conversation in the 12 months that I've been here related to bike and ped improvements, policy changes, things of that nature. And I know others on the committee, both past and present, have maybe at times expressed some frustration with how do we engage and create action and change. Whether it was related to requiring sidewalks in a new platted subdivision, to improving trail maintenance in the winter months for our trails, to site plans and some of the conditions that may be required as part of the approval process. So I thought it would be important to kind of talk at a high level about kind of these decision-making components that are found in local government, and then encourage the committee that this is really where your focus is at that point, based on those decisions. Ultimately, there's three types. There's legislative decisions, there's administrative decisions, and then there are these things called quasi-judicial decisions. To put it clearly and bluntly, really the main focus of this committee at this point is on legislative matters. You're really kind of a policy advising committee. You're giving the board recommendations on a variety of different topics related to bicycle and pedestrian improvements. Your biggest point of emphasis to the elected board is pretty much the bike and ped plan. And the bike and ped plan is your largest policy document. It basically houses all of the policy recommendations and changes that you would like the village board to enact over a period of time. And some of those are going to be very specific, and some of those are going to be kind of higher level, overarching kind of umbrella type issues. From there, that kind of sets a strategy or a work plan for this committee to then create influence and policy direction to more specific items. A really good case in point is the sidewalk ordinance amendment that is being presented to you tonight for discussion that will eventually make its way to village board. Here we have a situation where we have a platted subdivision that's coming forward to the village or had previously come forward. And because of the way the code is currently written, it wasn't something that we could require as part of that development. And we'll talk a little bit about, well, what does that mean with require? Because that really delves into more of the administrative side of decision making, okay? So ultimately what you're going to be doing is drafting policy, drafting recommendations, and forwarding those to the village board. And by and large, the board will ultimately have the final decision to enact an ordinance, to enact a policy, or to make amendments or changes therein. And that by and large is your biggest and your primary role. When it comes to policy and legislative decision making, you have full discretion, right? If you want to label the sky as green and the grass is blue, you can do that through legislative policy decision. Doesn't necessarily mean it's right, but if you want to do that, you have the discretion to do that. As so long as that legislative policy meets certain equal protection and constitutional obligations, right? But by and large, through our own affordability of Wisconsin statutes, we have a lot of free reign to develop whatever ordinances we want to see fit. So some common types of decisions that can be made at the legislative level are obviously ordinances or adopting amendments to village code. So again, the committee doesn't necessarily get to do that, but you get to recommend, right? You get to provide guidance and expertise to those issues, and then ultimately the board will make those adoptions. Adopting or amending a plan. Your bike and ped plan is a very good example of that. Comprehensive planning. Municipalities are required to adopt a comprehensive plan. One of the chapters in that comprehensive plan is related to transportation. So you have a lot of input in that component or that chapter of the comprehensive plan. Ultimately, when that gets adopted, that again triggers that policy adoption throughout the life expectancy of that plan. Some things that don't necessarily touch this committee, but but do have a large overarching impact to the community is zoning. Zoning is viewed as a completely legislative or discretionary matter. So, as an example, Highland Ridge, you get a platted subdivision that comes in and it's presently zoned public use for a golf course, and they want to redevelop it into single-family homes. There is no obligation that the village board has to rezone that property. It's completely discretionary based on the desires that the village board has. Now, with that, it needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So you can't just per se zone it to whatever you want, as long as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. You have the discretion to rezone it. Okay? If you don't want to rezone it, you don't have to. You have that discretion to make that choice. And then really ultimately adopting the annual budget is also very discretionary. So as you've learned, as it relates to trail maintenance and plowing, those require financial obligations, and so that is kind of a discretionary decision that the board has. All of those things, again, are elements that this committee has an influence over, right? So you can provide recommendations, you can provide input, it ultimately goes to the village board, and then they make the final decision as to how that's going to be enacted. So that is really, by and large, the main and primary role of this committee. There are two other types of decisions that are made at a local governmental level, and one of those is administrative decisions. Administrative decisions are really kind of more like, if you want to consider them by right decisions. So a really good example that this committee sometimes gets involved with are site plans. Site plan review is an administrative decision. So there is a municipal code related within the zoning code or other sections of our municipal code that dictate what is and is not allowable within a site plan. Anything that the code identifies as being required is required. Anything that is not required isn't required. And so long as an applicant meets all of the requirements of code, by right, they have the ability to get approval on that. Similar to like a building permit. If an individual applies to build a single-family home in a privately zoned parcel and district and meets all of the other provision requirements, they, by right, can build that home. Think about it as they've met all the entitlements and they met all the conditions of code, and by right, they can meet that. So when we get into conversations today about Bell and Health, ultimately, unless conditions are required by code, the recommendations that this body brings forward to site plan review are just that. They're just recommendations. It doesn't necessarily mean that the applicant or staff or anybody else within the village is unsupportive of the recommendations. It just means we cannot hold the approval up to meet those obligations because they are not required by code. Okay. So some good examples of administrative decisions, site plans I already mentioned. Plats or CSMs, those are by right. So as long as they meet the statutory and local village code requirements to get a platted subdivision, those are administrative. If we issue a contract for public improvement, we are obligated under statute. That is a administrative decision. The issuance of any types of permits or licenses, so alcohol licensing for that matter. Somebody applies to get an alcohol license and they meet all the statutory requirements, and all the requirements under village code, they by right are entitled to that license, so long as the license is available. And then appointments to boards, commissions, and staff, those things are identified primarily in code, and so as long as those appointments are made under the understanding of or the provisions of the code, then by right they are administratively required. The other decisions are called quasi-judicial, and those are kind of complicated. Generally speaking, those are kind of, think of them as kind of the court of law. And generally speaking, you really only have a few bodies at local level that deal with quasi-judicial decisions. Village board being one of them. Your board of appeals, so your zoning board of appeals deals with them. Your planning commission will deal with them at times, depending on how code is written. And then at times, your police and fire commission will also deal with them. And essentially what those are is that ultimately the village board ultimately decides with legislative decisions. Administrative law is really kind of more the execution of law. And the quasi-judicial is basically taking an application and weighing it against the law, okay? So a good example of that would be like a conditional use permit. So long as these conditions have been met, they're entitled to receive that permit, okay? And so there's kind of a case, if you will, a quasi-judicial matter, where the body that's taking up this issue is weighing the evidence to confirm that this applicant meets the conditions to achieve the permit. And it gives opportunities for people that object to that application to provide evidence to the contrary, right? And so ultimately the board is weighing the evidence and then ultimately making a decision based upon that evidence. By and large, this group doesn't have to deal with that, thankfully, because there's a whole litany of other issues that you have to be concerned about when you're dealing with quasi-judicial matters, such as ex parte communication, which means you have to remain completely objective and independent prior to the hearing, so that you come in and you are hearing the evidence as it's being presented, right? And there's a variety of other concerns that you want to be worried about. I'm not going to spend too much time on quasi-judicial matters just because you won't have to deal with them. Ultimately, though, the reason why I wanted to touch on this is that we're going to be talking through a couple items tonight that are going to more or less kind of touch on these issues. So we're going to talk about a sidewalk ordinance. That is a legislative matter. Ultimately, this committee is going to provide a recommendation back to the village board for adoption to an amendment of their code. And so that's a very applicable action by this group. The other item that we'll talk about tonight is Bellin's site plan. Now that's a site plan, okay? And some of the recommendations that may come from this committee or members of that committee are not required in order for Bellin to achieve their site plan approval. And so you may see them as recommendations because they're coming from the committee, but approval of the site plan cannot be conditioned on those matters, okay? Because they've met the conditions. Now, with that being said, that may spur your interest then to look at ways to influence the legislative process, right? Give you a couple of quick examples. Bike racks, that's another ordinance amendment, right? That is a legislative matter. So you're going to work in developing a recommendation that will ultimately be forwarded to the village board for potential adoption. Bellin Health, the concept or the conversation related to sidewalks and whether sidewalks should be included around the right-of-way of that redevelopment. Our code currently doesn't require it, so that cannot be a condition of approval for Bellin. Doesn't mean that we can't install them, and it doesn't necessarily mean that in the future we can't create that requirement within our code. But again, that's a legislative decision, right? So you're developing a policy recommendation to bring to the board, to them, for them to then adopt, so that future development, when it comes forward, has that requirement, okay? Now, I also want to mention that this committee is obviously focused on the improvements for bicyclists and pedestrians, right? You have an interest in that end. The village board obviously has that interest as well, but they also have other interests that they have to take into consideration. So because this is the main advocating group for bike and ped interest, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is how the board feels, right? As an example, we craft an ordinance recommendation to require sidewalks on all new redevelopment. That goes to the village board. The village board will say, well, we like that idea. We like to improve the accommodations for bicyclists and pedestrians, but we don't know that we're necessarily willing to require developers to do that. Because we're worried that this requirement may be onerous for the developer, and we will lose development opportunity by having that as a requirement. So we're not gonna enact that ordinance. We appreciate the committee's efforts, but we're concerned that it's going to be to the detriment of future development. So let's figure out a different way to do that, right? And that could come back to the committee. So I just always want to emphasize that whether it's the Bike and Ped Committee, the Park Board, or any board that is focused on a specific issue or element in the community, that there are other issues that our elected officials have to take into consideration when they enact policy decisions. So we wanted to have this conversation because we knew there was going to be some touchy subjects tonight. And we wanted to make sure that we were kind of on the same page as to what our goal is as a committee as we move forward in working with the village board to try to enact some of these efforts. So with that, I'll answer whatever questions you have in particular on this matter.
If I heard you correctly, everything we do is suggested,
Right. You're an advisory body, right?
which makes sense.
And it's not to burn you out, right? It's not to, and again, and my point at the end there was not to create a condition where you feel like your wheels are spinning and you're not making any effort or any forward progress. I think you are. It just, unfortunately, sometimes government moves slow, and it moves slow intentionally to try to make sure that you've gotten your I's dotted and your T's crossed.
As long as I've been on this committee, I think we have always been here recommending. And now it sounds to me, this is the impression that I get, is that our recommendations, I don't know, it feels like somebody on the board all of a sudden said, well, I don't know if I like the recommendations that the Bike and Pedestrian Committee is giving. That's the impression that I got.
Sure.
I may be all wet when I say that, but, and I've been here for a pretty damn long time. You know, and it's.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm not here to change how you perceive or feel that things are progressing and how they are recently. I think my intent by this conversation is to kind of counter that viewpoint, is that if we put your efforts in the proper context, I think you'll find that you are making progress. If we're looking to make changes to items that we don't have authority to make changes towards, that's where you're going to start to feel like your wheels are spinning and you're not making progress, right? That if we put our energy and attention on the areas that we do have control, then we'll make good effort.
I think it's always been that if the board decided that they wanted to turn down what we suggested, and being on the committee here, do not remember, I don't think, ever saying that, well, hey, I don't agree with what they're saying, let's counteract this or something. I've been here long enough where they say, okay, if this is it, this is it. And, you know.
So you're looking for compromise.
You know, I mean,
But you can't.
But I think that's the job and the responsibility of village board, whether we like it or not.
I
You
understand
know, they
that.
make the decisions. Rex may want something, Aaron may want something, Doug may want something. They ask the board and the board either says yes or no. So,
Yeah, well,
you know, that's the way it is to
Yeah,
everybody, you know.
I'm
and-
with Kyle.
and
You can't give up. I mean, in my position here, I put my time in because I'm hoping I can change their viewpoint.
And you're right. And
There's personalities there's personalities here. So how do we get them to see our side, right?
I think.
I haven't been on it as long as you, so I'm sure there's more frustration there, but I've always looked at it that way. You have to be able to, I'm not going to give up because somebody decided that they don't agree with us.
And I think Joel is sort of giving us the blueprint, saying, here's what you guys need to do to get the board to listen. You know, Doug mentioned once, it's easier for him if something's in the bike and ped plan. If it's in the bike and ped plan, it's easier for him to move forward on that. So I think what we have to do is try to get more specific on the bike and ped plan. One thing you mentioned was bike parking. The village doesn't have an ordinance on that. I've seen the plans for the entertainment district, the Titletown, and one of them said there should be bike parking. And I asked Aaron, well, what type of, you know, how do they define bike parking? And they really don't. So now we're trying to get something in there that says, here's what acceptable bike parking is, rather than just say bike parking. You know, we want to be more specific, and so it makes it clear for Aaron or whoever's making those decisions. You know, a developer comes in or make it redoing something, and the plan says they have to have bike parking. Well, all of a sudden, the ordinance tells them what bike parking should be.
And just to be clear on that, I happened to take a drive through Titletown or a walk through Titletown, and just to kind of anticipating that question coming up. And there are actually 3 sets of inverted U bike racks in Titletown, and one was being used. So I mean, I think that's, since even though it's not fully built out, I think they're I think they're heading in the right direction. So I think we're, bringing it up initially was great. Sure, we didn't have the exact specifications that we needed, but at that time we did say according to the that standard, and they did it.
I'm going to use an analogy as well. I'm going to jump in with my 2 cents here. And I've said this before, that I know sometimes people on the committee get frustrated. I was frustrated with the 172 pedestrian crossing. Like everyone was. That might not have been the best decision, but hey, it is what it is. But I'm going to use an analogy of what happened with our referendum projects, with the pool and the Performing Arts Center and Center. There was a pool committee formed in the late 90s looking at rebuilding that pool. There was a community center committee that formed in 2007, and literally, like with the pool committee, I'll say, 15 years later, it took them 15 years. Every couple of years, the village board would say, okay, here's $5,000, here's $10,000, make up a plan. There's at least 3 sets of plans for a new pool that were spent. The village spent money on them and nothing happened because the village board at the time decided it wasn't the right time. And finally in 2014, when the referendum happened, don't get me wrong on this, but I think because people kept on chipping away, bringing it up, people in the community saw that the issue wasn't going away. It wasn't a one-time idea. It was lasting for years and years. So it's like, all right, let's settle this once for all. Do we want a new pool? And it went to referendum, and yes, it happened. So I almost use that as an analogy for any of these projects. Just because something doesn't go through the first time doesn't mean it's not going to go through in the future, or that your efforts are for naught. Because try telling that, I'm sure the committee, the aquatic or pool committee back in 1998 or 1999, thought, well, this sucks, this is stupid, why do we do this? The village isn't building us a new pool. And then when I came on board in 2005, 2006, I was working with Jeremy at the time, sitting right over there. And he got another whole redesign of that pool together. Another 5 or 10,000, was it $15,000? Plans were all made up, nothing happened, shelved them. That group, that pool committee felt very frustrated at that time. But then the next round came, another pool committee was formed, and all of a sudden the referendum came up and worked again. Were it not for the efforts of all those previous pool committees, I don't know if we still have a new pool, because people wouldn't have realized that need or that want was there in the communities. You know what I mean? Because it took that long for people to get it, keep on hearing it until they decided, you know what, I'm going to vote for it because we've been talking about this for 15 years. I'm tired. I'm tired of hearing people talk about it. Let's put it to vote, type of thing. And that's kind of how I look at a lot of these projects. Don't think because something doesn't pass the first time that it's not going to pass in the future, or that it's done no good, that their efforts to do something have done no good, because it's put bike and ped in the forefront. Anytime there's a project that comes up, I guarantee you, Aaron or Doug are thinking, what do we need to do for bike and ped? What's required? And that's where Joel's coming in, saying, if you want something required, start to change some of the legislation. You know what I mean? At the very least, all the stuff that we've been doing, is making people think, and bit by bit, things are building up in terms of what's happening in the community, whether it be sidewalks or trails or anything like that. Yeah, were it not for you guys, I guarantee you half the stuff that's been done in the last 10 years, more than half the stuff wouldn't be done. Yeah, I guarantee you.
Yeah, when all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but now they're considering a sidewalk ordinance. I never thought I'd see that.
Yep.
It's slow, but like I said, there's progress. It just is slow.
So we're thankful for all because of your age and all those years. But I really believe we have one thing in our advantage right now, and that is the world is changing. And I don't care if it's this village or what city it is, they better open up their eyes, because people want to be on a bicycle. People want to be able to walk where they go. people don't want to necessarily be in their car. So if we want to join the party, and we certainly have the right area to do that, right? Talk about Titletown, I spend so much time in Titletown, it's great. I have my grandkids there again this weekend. It was packed. It was packed. I mean, those are nice things, and people that are closer, if they're in a motel and they can walk there, or you can bike there, or whatever, what's it do? It draws people in. We're spoiled. I mean, when you think about it, where Ashwaubenon's located, we're spoiled. We don't have to do a ton of marketing to get people to come here. We have the facilities here to draw them in. So I think, I would never be negative if they said no to me. I would just move on and try to change their viewpoint, whatever that takes. And to your point, if it takes 10 times or it takes 15 times, so be it. You know what else is going on in the world right now? They're not the only people you got to change their viewpoint.
When we asked the board to consider plowing the trails, that's great if we get them this year. But if we don't get them this year, we're back the year after year, and eventually we'll wear them down, I think.
Well, they know we're coming back, right?
And we had it. Some people thought, I never thought I would go for that, but I don't know where he was, the fellow who owns the liquor store. And he said,
Chris, yeah.
and he said, well, I never thought that would be a good idea, but he was someplace and saw people biking and out. He said, well, it's not a bad idea. And it just takes time.
I think when you look at your bike and ped plan, and some of these are different, you either have the 4Es, the 5Es, I've seen them with 6Es already, but one of those components is education, right? And so sometimes your elected officials need to be educated in these issues and educated about the priorities in their community. You are citizens of this community just like every other constituent in their neighborhood, and you have a viewpoint. And with the more access you have to them and the more opportunities you have to communicate with them about these topics, the more education they receive about the importance of them. So, and that's the key component of this committee. It's really kind of just develop direction, recommendations, and bring those forward for the board for consideration. Elements that are kind of more administrative, if you will, we'll let you know. As staff, we'll say, hey, our code doesn't require this. I can't go to that developer. I can't go to that business and tell them they have to do this. I'll put it as a recommendation, but at the end of the day, it's going to be their decision, right? If this is a strong viewpoint, however, we'll have to go through a legislative process, an ordinance process to get this to be a requirement. It's not anything against the committee or your efforts. It's just we're trying to find the proper avenue, if you will, the route that you can take to get to the end that you want to achieve.
I think all of our stuff has been recommendations.
Yep.
Some
stick and some don't, right?
Maybe you should run for village board.
Right? I was just thinking, if you were a
trustee,
trustee, you would.
If I was on the village board, we would have had a bridge across 172. Believe me.
You're only one vote.
No.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
Well,
what,
you have enough faith?
before Mike passed away, I talked to Mike and he told me right out. He said, Leroy, if I would have known at the time that biking and walking was going to be as much as it is, he said, I would have voted different. And we would have had that bridge. And the state would have paid $3 million and we would have paid $600,000 as a village. That's gone, but it's still I don't know.
I just have go ahead.
Yes,
Speaking of history, it's crazy as it sounds. I went in for a haircut last week and they cut most of the gray hair away. But I've been here going on 22 years. Tracy was Park and Rec director until 2005. Rex came in afterwards. I can speak from history. The amount of trails and sidewalks and bike lanes that were in 2005 up to 2005 and what's happened since is a dramatic difference. A large increase in it. So that's a sign of progress. You were asking about progress.
Yeah.
That's a sign of progress. Now, is it the speed that everybody wants at a certain point in time? Maybe not. Maybe not. Are there stumbles along the way? There'll be stumbles from here till eternity. That's on everything. That's not just on bike and ped stuff. That's on everything. Stormwater, public works, park and rec, developments, everything has stuff, those stumbling blocks. But the progress is there. And I don't know if one of the E's is enjoyment, but also don't forget to enjoy some of that also, because there've been a lot of great things that have happened.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes, and that goes with anything. That isn't just bike and ped stuff. We have to do the same thing in utilities, and everybody has to do in their own jobs. You have to take a step back every once in a while and appreciate some of the things that have been done. During the middle of those referendum projects, I'll be honest with you, I didn't find a day's worth of enjoyment when we were in the middle of constructing those things and having contractors holler at you and trying to figure out problems. But after it was all done, and you have a daughter that goes into high school and starts using the pool, you know what, that's pretty darn cool. Yeah. You don't see it at the time, but you got to take that opportunity, take a step back also and enjoy it. And so don't forget to do that also. And I'm not saying that I'm saying that with, because I didn't do that during those points in time. And it'll grind you down after a while. It'll grind you down as a committee if you don't take a moment to go, you know what? A, B, C, and D have been done. That's a pretty good thing. And if that doesn't get you feeling a little bit better, I think I have a couple of crappies left in the freezer.
Along with Wally's.
There you go. There you go.
I ate all
You ate all.
I just have one question in regard to site plan. So, and maybe explain it to the committee as well. So site plan is something, a balance site, let's just take for instance. The process goes to staff first. So staff looks at all the plans, they make recommendations, they look at what is required, and then they come up with recommendations or requirements for that development. And then it goes site plan committee, and they make the final approval. So that's, once it's through there, it doesn't go to village board, doesn't go to plan commission unless it's in certain districts, correct? So Bellin would not. So it went to site plan, so it's really done. So my question as the chair of this committee, where do we fit into that? Because to me, to have that on there now makes no sense to me for us to be looking at it, because we have no say in it. It's already been approved by site plan, correct? And so why are we even looking at it? And should we even be looking at site plans? And let's say you say, no, we really shouldn't. It's not our place to look at those. That's fine. But then I think what we need to do on site plan is have somebody, I mean, Kyle looks at them as like a staff level kind of person. But if we don't get the plans for site plan, I think someone either from this committee maybe could be put on that committee so that they can sit on that, or maybe there is a rep that is a bike ped rep that sits on the committee. So more of that stuff, because it's a big deal. It's no, when you're looking at a site plan for bike ped type facilities, just like it is for roads and parking lots, it's an expense for that developer. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it and skin that cat. And maybe if we have somebody from this committee that's sitting on there, or someone that can speak to that, it may be more prevalent, or they may look at that a little bit more. So that's my concern. I mean, if we're not supposed to be getting site plan stuff, then just tell me no. Say no, Trace, that can't go on there. It doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't be there. So that's my question. Maybe go through that process and whether we should even get it or not. Because if we're not supposed to get it, then don't send it to us.
Do you want to go first and then I can follow up?
Sure.
Or I can go first and you can follow up?
I can go first. It's actually unique having Kyle as a committee member review it basically as a staff member.
It is.
So for instance, Public Works Protection, there's no committee member that reviews it. And we have Steve and Doug on occasion will review it. The comments come into me, I compile them, put them into the plan or into the conditions or recommendations as needed. But really, this committee via Kyle does get to review the site plans on the front end, which is significantly more input than other committees actually get.
Right.
So Plan Commission, for instance, they don't have any input into it unless it goes to Sports Entertainment Village Center. So as it stands right now, Bike and Ped actually has a lot of input that other communities don't, which is unique.
Yeah.
I don't think many places do that. It's also then what's hard too is just because, again, going back to Joel's point, there are certain things that are administrative. So again, it meets the code or it doesn't. And there are some things where it's like, yeah, that'd be great, but I can't require that because our site plan is a by right process. It's either required or it's not. If there are certain things, for instance, bike racks,
Are they required in that development for Bellin or not?
There's nothing in our code that
Okay,
requires
so-
bike racks. Now, that said, when it comes to bike racks, I'll make a strong push in certain instances where I'll be like, look, this is a recommendation from Bike and Ped, but Mission Barbecue, for instance. You know what? You may have people who work at Mission Barbecue who want to bike there. You may have people who are stopping in there. And it makes sense to have a bike rack, that meets the standards in this location. And typically they'll go along with that, but again, they could say, yeah, Aaron, we appreciate that, but we don't see it in your code. And I'd say, yeah, you're right. It's a recommendation, that's all it is. There are other instances where, you know what, it just doesn't make sense, like a 2,000 square foot addition to an industrial building. Yeah, you know what, it doesn't in that instance. But it's certainly something that Kyle brings up as appropriate to the development, and I bring it forward to the actual site plan committee. So, I think to a degree, this committee has a lot of input already, and I think that's to the village's benefit. So as far as, why Bellin is coming to this committee at this point, I guess I'm not sure. I saw it was on the agenda and I thought, okay, I guess I better be there to discuss it, but right, it's been the site plan, it's been approved
Right.
with the input from Kyle.
Well, and Kyle and I were at site plan, and unfortunately, I get my hand high enough in the air, so I didn't have a chance to speak at site plan, which happens, and I should have probably stood up and yelled or something.
They
but
saw it, they just.
yeah, I probably just no, they didn't say Mary felt bad. And that's,
Yeah, no,
This
and
happens.
Mary called me and
Right.
said she felt bad.
yeah,
So
and it's,
I didn't see it either.
It's
Eric
probably-
saw it.
yeah, and I should have said more, and I should have stood up or said something, but so I didn't get a chance to speak at all at site plan, and I guess and if we're getting tough topic here a little bit, but in the bike ped plan, we talked about plans being legislative and all of that stuff. It calls for sidewalks on both sides of Wabi Lane, calls for sidewalks on Allied, and Kyle maybe looked at that and did realize, oh, this is what it's calling for. But, it's not in the code, so we can't require it. And to me, it's my board, and I want to have a chance at least to say something and talk about it. Now there's no chance for me to speak for the residents that live in that ward. And so that was my frustration, but it was my fault too. So I'm not saying Mary did anything wrong, it was my fault too. But that's the reason I added it on here. But you guys need to say, if it should be on here, tell me that. You are staff, and you need to say to me, Trace, it does not belong in there. And I go, fine, it does not belong
Well,
in
I
there.
think that the point of having this conversation today is to recognize that it's certainly acceptable to having these conversations and these discussions at this committee. It's certainly acceptable for Kyle or whomever, everybody on the committee, to get a copy of the site plan as it's submitted for comments and feedback. That's certainly acceptable.
I would ask it's funneled through Kyle though, just because I
Just so
can't
he
all of a
only
sudden
has
get.
one.
No.
Yeah.
And there,
Go ahead.
pardon me. And the reason for that, and the idea behind that is at that point, either A, the committee identifies that there is a discrepancy between the application and code, right? Let's say sidewalks were required and they didn't include it in their plan. I would guarantee somebody from this committee would say, hey, sidewalks are to be required.
Yeah.
Aaron, did you catch that? And Aaron would say, yes, I caught that. That's a condition of approval that they would include sidewalks. Or let's say it's not required, as in this case. Somebody would say, hey, this is a big development, and our bike ped plan says Wabi Lane, Allied Drive should have sidewalks. You gotta get that in there. And Aaron would say, well, I can provide it as a recommendation to the developer, but right now our code does not require it. I know our plan says it, and we would indicate that to them, hey, and as part of the site plan review, it is recommended that you include sidewalks. And is there anything that you can do to accommodate that? We can't require it, it's not a condition of approval, but we're asking you to include it. It's the same thing with bike racks and all that other stuff. They're not required, and so they're not a condition of approval, but they are a recommendation. And I think there's a lot of value to be said to have this committee do that type of effort. Now, kind of going back to your previous comment, even if this body was the site plan review committee, you would still have to approve site plans based on the requirements of code.
Right.
So your decision-making probably wouldn't be any different than what the site plan review committee already does, because it's a strict administrative application. You're looking at the code, is it yes or is it no? If everyone answers yes, approve. It has to be required in the code. So I don't know that, having a bike and ped minded person from this committee sit on the committee, unless there's a provision within the code that creates these requirements, the decision making should be the same, because it's black and white.
So the only way to change it would be to change code.
Correct.
And the code would say, we require, or one of the requirements is bike and ped accommodations.
I get the plans, and in most cases, it's, here's the Mission Grill wants to build a building. Starbucks is remodeling, somebody else is doing something. So it's really confined to one lot, and I make recommendations for, bike parking. When Chick-fil-A wanted to build their building, I put recommendations as to where crosswalks could be and warning for pedestrians. And we do some of that stuff. So most of it is just confined to one lot, one small building. This one, to me, has such a substantial impact on that part of the village. We really need to talk about that, and whether they put sidewalks or follow our recommendations. I think the bike and ped plan needs to address that, because, like he was saying, we had the pool committee for 20 years before they got a pool. So we're not necessarily looking at the village and that part of the village the way it is now. We're looking at 20 years forward. And if we can get, one of the things I would have liked to seen was in the plan, there's a walking path, a gravel walking path around the perimeter of that property, which I'm guessing is for employees or whatever. And my recommendation was the part on Allied and the part on Wabi be paved, to make it like a sidewalk. And I would also, I guess, like to see it connected to the sidewalk that the state put when they redid the highway. Underneath there, they have a sidewalk. Now it doesn't really go anyplace, although I guess there's a crosswalk there. But eventually, people are going to want to walk down there. And if I drop off somebody there to have, knee surgery, and they're going to be in recovery for 3 or 4 hours, if I want to walk down to get a sandwich, if I want to walk over to Stein's or want to walk to Quick Trip or whatever gets developed down there, in the future, I guess if we start talking about that now, it's one of those things that.
That's a good point, because is there a sidewalk up the Ridge Road?
No doubt about
On that side, no.
Not on the south.
On
The
the
north
north
side, the north side, right?
Because you got the path on the other side, so they got 400 and some employees. That's their estimate, whatever. Some of those people I see people from Schneider walk that path all the time when I ride by. So it's pretty popular.
And to that point, so in the recommendation section,
Yeah.
I put in there, pave that path. Again, as you couch it, this is a recommendation. It's not required by code. It came from Bike and Ped to pave, this section of the path.
Yep.
And, they'll take that for what they will, and, they either will pave it or they won't. But we ultimately have to look at it too, because it's not required. And if we would have said, no, that has to be paved, they might have said, you know what, we're not going to put the path in, because there's no requirement to have a path there.
Right.
So again, there's some give and take there. So I gave a strong recommendation to pave it, but ultimately it's going to be their call.
And maybe they never thought of paving it, but now they think about paving it. So I guess that's our role. And
Yeah, at least you've got some input, to your point.
Right.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have any input. It's like the bicycle racks. If you got that many employees, some of those people are riding their bike to work. They're not taking a car. So I would think they'd want to do something like that. But what I wanted to ask real quick is, so when I read this, because I actually did go through this, because I've never seen it, is this specific to Bella? Does everybody's site plan look different?
Everybody's, Review? What section?
This is the application.
Everyone has that application.
So it's always, no matter what the business is, this is the application.
It is. Now, that said, sometimes someone will just update a portion of that. So they're just going to update the landscaping. It's only do the landscaping.
Yeah.
Might just update the exterior of it, just do the exterior.
Because I even saw some things where they didn't have it available yet, so they didn't check it off and have a note at the bottom saying that it would be in future or something like that.
I've seen site plans come through where they're going to make a change, and the changes, the fence and the dumpster. So
Yeah.
sometimes those changes are pretty minor.
It's pretty thorough.
It is.
I'm like, well, it's written there.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything else about second?
No.
Did you?
No.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions on that or anything that anybody else wants to add? More informational, just to kind of let us know this is our role, this is other roles, this is village board. And, there's gonna be many times that things come from this committee and they come from our committee. When I was there, that the village board say, nope, I'm not going there. So it just, they have a final say, so it's gonna happen. But you guys have to decide on the site plan, which, like I said, if it doesn't need to, if it can't come here, there's no reason to do it, then.
Yeah, no, I
Won't
think,
send
I
it here
think the
anymore.
intent would be to continue to distribute the site plan and get feedback. Again, the case in point is just simply, when the report goes before site plan review committee and back to the applicant, unless it's a requirement of code, it's gonna be listed as a recommendation.
Yep.
And at that point, we're not doing that in spite of you, or to spite you, I should say. We're doing that just because that's the requirement of code. That's all we can do. Right?
But at least we're getting that possibility, right?
And when we get that feedback from Kyle, oftentimes we also meet with the developer too and say, hey, this came across from our bike and pet committee. We think it's a really good recommendation. Is that something that you want to take into consideration? We can put some emphasis on it too. Again, they don't have to do it. Many times developers are kind of 50-50. Sometimes they're very receptive to it. They want to make a real solid development. Other times they're very cost conscious. When you bring these recommendations, a lot of times there's a cost associated with it, and they're going to back out of commitments then because of that.
I do want to reiterate one thing. When it comes to site plan review, it's very time sensitive. Time is money, especially for the developer as well as for our department. Our site plan review committee meets twice a month on the first and the third Tuesday. So we have a really quick turnaround sometimes on these site plans. I try to get them out as soon as they come in, but sometimes I don't get a site plan in until 2 weeks before. That's the minimum they have to send them to me. So there isn't a whole lot of time to do a lot of in-depth analysis, bring it to committee, for instance, and, well, what about this? What about this? I appreciate Kyle getting comments back to me in a timely manner because I have to have this information in to Terry, usually by the Wednesday at noon or Thursday morning at the latest, the week prior. So I usually have about 2 to 3 days to get all my staff reports together for site plan review committee. So again, it's very time sensitive. So just kind of keep that in mind. If for some reason you decide you want the whole committee to comment on something, you certainly can funnel through Kyle, but it's a very time sensitive process.
So the comments you get back from all the staff, then you don't necessarily sit back down with that developer. It goes to site plan review, and then that's going to be the first time they're hearing it. Or you may
No.
get back to them and say, here's stuff that's coming from
As
staff.
soon as I submit it to Terry to get into the packet, I send a copy of the site plan review staff report, along with any conditions or recommendations of approval prior to the meeting. And I ask them to remind them, here's the date, time, so on and so forth for the meeting. Any questions, comments, concerns, please contact me prior to the meeting. Again, it's important for the developer and for the village to make sure when we get to site plan review committee, again, it's black and it's white.
Yep.
It's an administrative process. So I don't want to get to a point where we're at site plan review committee or like bargaining on the floor saying, well, I think we should do this. Well, I think we should do this. Again, black and white. But the developer always sees it prior to going to site plan.
So when I get the site plans, there is a separate document. It's like an Excel sheet. And there are 2 pages, and one of them are conditions of approval. And here the zoning administrator and building inspector had some stuff, engineering, stormwater, public safety. And then there's also recommendations. Some are required, and bike and ped is always a recommendation. And I think, I don't see them here, but forestry, I think, had some recommendations too. So what type of tree should be planted? So, so I think I update this, the way I understand it, you update this, and it's just like a master document everybody can see.
Okay, any other questions or comments on that, anybody? Joel, thanks for that.
Yeah, I
Thanks
appreciate
for,
the explanation.
You guys weighing in on it. I the more information that we have and understand, the better it is for us. And we're just trying to work together and make it a better, a good development as best as we
I think
can.
guys knew we were just suggestive
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
that we didn't have a lot of power, but.
Yeah.
Joel, or Aaron, if I could just ask one thing, going back to the, on the website, I don't know what I was looking for, but there's like a master plan for the Titletown district and for the entertainment district. And in one of them, it's, I've alluded to this before, it says that bike parking. So is that by code in that plan, that document? I don't know if you know.
Are you talking about the urban design guidelines?
I think that's it.
Okay, that goes back a number of years, and that actually predates a lot of things that happened in the village.
Okay.
Those were guidelines, and I have worked a lot of those guidelines into actual ordinance form, into the site plan review requirements, concealed fasteners, all that stuff that we typically talk about. I'm sure Chris lets you know all about concealed fasteners.
I hear about them often.
But right, if there are other items that, again, go back to Joel's point, that you see in the urban design guidelines or bike parking, whatever it might be, that you feel need to be a requirement, that's something where this committee makes a recommendation to bring something to village board for an ordinance amendment.
And those plans are kind of the starting point, if you will. You put a lot of effort and emphasis into developing the plans and create recommendations for policy. Now we have to take those policies and we have to enact them in some way into ordinance form, right, in order to make them a requirement. Otherwise, they're still just a recommendation. Right?
Anything else, somebody? Then we'll go on to 8B. Yeah. Action on proposed revisions to Chapter 20 subdivision regarding pedestrian accommodations. And I'm going to hand this to Aaron in about 2 seconds here, but I just wanted to remind you guys, this kind of came about as part of the Highland Bridge development, because we came back with a recommendation to put sidewalks on all roads, both sides of the road, and then it went through the process and they ended up with a trail going on the main road. So then we went back to village board several months later and just talked about, in general, do we want to require pedestrian accommodations in our new subdivisions? And we debated it for a while, went back and forth, and after the village board went through it, they decided that yes, they wanted to look into it. So they did ask staff to do an ordinance to include pedestrian accommodations in the ordinance. So that's what Aaron has done, and that's kind of how it got to where it is right now.
Yep. So the ordinance that we use for subdivision plats is chapter 20, subdivisions of the village of Ashwaubenon. Within that code are all the requirements for subdivisions: sanitary sewer, storm sewer, electrical, gas, street width, street right-of-way width, kind of all the geometrics and requirements to get a subdivision together. Currently within there, there's no requirement for sidewalks. Okay. The issue that came up with Highland Ridge was we got it all the way basically to village board, and all of a sudden, wait, we need to put pedestrian accommodations in here. At that point, the developer nearly had a heart attack because it's something where they developed their pro forma, their financing, everything based upon their estimated cost of construction. Certainly when it comes to sidewalks, there's an increased cost of construction. What I'm trying to do with what I've worked up here for an amendment to this ordinance is to flip that. To say, all right, sidewalks are required on the front end. That way the developer, as they're putting together a pro forma, they include that line item in there. Okay. So we're going from a high cost, and if for some reason the village board says, you know what, we just need a trail in this location instead, okay, well, that's a reduction in cost. It's a much easier way to deal with, go to the bank and say, yes, it's a reduction in cost as opposed to an increase. So what I did was took the direction from village board, so we want to see pedestrian accommodations. And the way I approached this was, just first of all, the definition, always when it comes to code writing, make sure your definitions are sound. Pedestrian accommodations mean sidewalks, paved paths running parallel to streets, off-street trails, mid-block crossings, public access easements between parcels, public rights-of-way between parcels, or a combination thereof. So all of those are considered pedestrian accommodations. And by having it defined in there, the village board can really look at that and say, okay, these are what we have to choose from, kind of a pick list of different pedestrian options.
So it would include like the mid-lot crossing that we had requested on Sandy. Okay.
Right. Now, what I also did in this code was, it hadn't been updated in a while, and there were a number of outdated provisions, just from a statutory standpoint, that had nothing to do with pedestrian accommodations. But I figured, all right, if I'm updating this, bring it through the revision process, I may as well clean everything up. So you will see a lot of different changes in here that have nothing to do with bike or ped. But when we get to the primary point here for the committee, so in this case, we had a conflict here between the zoning code and the subdivision code for setbacks. So I got rid of that.
So we'll go back to, so the setback requirements in the past, they were listed in the code, right?
In the subdivision code, but they're also listed in the zoning code.
Okay, so now in
And there was a
this,
conflict.
you're saying it's in one table, this is where you're gonna look for it. So
Correct.
you're not specifying it in this code. Okay.
Right. We're trying
You're
to,
taking that out.
yeah, because what someone could do is they look at the subdivision code and say, oh, wait, your arterial street setback is 35 feet. Well, United Street's an arterial street, so it's 35 foot. And our zoning code is 20 foot. So there's a conflict there. So we just got rid of it, went to the zoning code.
So when you did the same thing, Aaron, with the right of way, when you took that out too, right? Because it looked like you had it in here, it was 100 feet, 80 feet, 70 feet.
Right.
So that you did the same thing. So then the question on that, it does say the width are specified on the official map, or if no width is specified, then they shall be the width recommended by Department of Public Works.
Correct.
So does the official map recommend widths on most roads, on very few roads, on just collectors and arterials, or how
So
typically is that?
just to kind of back up a little bit. So an official map is it's an official document adopted by ordinance saying this is the official street map of the village of Ashwaubenon. So in there, you might identify future road connections, different street widths, so on and so forth. I don't know if the village actually has an officially adopted official street map.
So I'm just gonna ask.
Right.
So like for, let's just.
I don't know who does.
We have an official street map, but it does not lay out future streets.
Okay, so like Highland
So
Ridge,
what-
for instance, would it have spelled out any of those roads in there?
No,
No.
that
Okay.
happens at the time of application
Okay.
for a CSM or for a subdivision plat.
Yes.
So the official map wouldn't, it would maybe do main big roads, but it wouldn't necessarily do smaller.
Not
No,
even that
that.
actually, because the village is so built out, that official map is basically an update of what's existing out there. So
Okay.
the official street map comes after the roads are built, and
Okay.
it's basically just a street map, an
Okay,
existing street map of the village. It doesn't, because there's only that southwest quadrant, if you will, of the
Yep,
village
that
left.
is- yep.
And a little bit because of the change in development structure over the past maybe 10 years, is when these developments come in, because of what's out there, because of some of the land constraints, ESA constraints, the right-of-ways many times have to change in order to make a project doable or feasible. So for us to put out there a hard and fast number of what's required, many times may not work. So there's a general guideline that's in the code that they try to follow.
so then really saying this in here, that the street right of way shall be the width specified on the official map.
Well,
Is
again,
that
that's-
saying that past roads, or is that saying like if I'm doing Highland Ridge, there's gonna be nothing on the official map saying these are the widths of those, the right of way required for those roads, correct? That has nothing to do
About
with
the only
that.
thing you'd be able to use it for is, let's say all three phases of Highland Ridge are in. Okay, and somebody's looking at the Lynn property, which is the next one directly west. They'd be able to use that official map as a
Their
source, just to see what is feeding in,
Okay,
and they can make their preliminary determinations off of that.
Sometimes and I don't have this memorized here, but generally speaking, your official map will also classify your roads. And that classification will tie into some written code. You know, that typical standard design for an arterial, a collector, a local road. As Aaron mentioned, sometimes municipalities, but in particular growing communities, will identify future roads or approximate locations so that you can identify where those collectors and arterials should go. But it won't get updated until new roads are added into the system and accepted by the village, and then it gets added into
The official map,
unofficial.
the official map also, basically, if it's identified as an official map, as a village, you can not permit a building permit within that right of way because it's a future street.
Okay.
So again, it's more useful in developing
That's what I
communities.
say, I remember in the town, we had all the major roads laid out on the official map, and I don't remember them having widths on there, that's why I was, when I saw this in here, I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
some
is
do,
that-
some don't.
Okay.
So going back to kind of what we're talking about here as far as plat documentation, when it comes to subdivision platting, there's two primary steps. There's the preliminary plat and there's the final plat. I'll tell people the preliminary plat is preliminary in name only. When it comes to your subdivision, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where your approval process is. That's where any discussion takes place, give and take between you, the village, and the developer, is at the preliminary plat stage. The final plat, basically, as long as it is substantially consistent with the preliminary plat, is entitled to approval. So the final plat basically is a rubber stamp, okay? So what I have here for preliminary plat requirements, you can see what we have on here. Some of these are statutory requirements as far as scale bar, north arrow, so on and so forth. And I'm including in here proposed pedestrian accommodations. So this will be at the preliminary plat stage when those pedestrian accommodations need to be depicted on the plat.
Can I ask a question quick on that?
Yeah.
Is there, could we put in also proposed bicycle accommodations? Would that be something that could be put into that whole list? Because we really don't mention bicycles in here. I mean, it's some, obviously a trail can be bike and ped both. But it just isn't really mentioned. As I was looking through, I'm like, well, if you want a bike lanes, like someone had, there was a collector going through a new subdivision. Maybe you want bike lanes on there, but it doesn't.
You wouldn't really
get mentioned.
Since bike lanes are a function, basically marked on the street, you wouldn't see that in the plat. The plat only identifies the right of way.
Right.
So you wouldn't see any kind of lane markings per se. But there's no reason why you couldn't put proposed pedestrian and bicycle accommodations. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
I think we're talking about subdivisions, so it's not,
Yeah.
if they had a
You
subdivision,
could have a subdivision with that might have a road. I mean, it's kind of like.
but not in,
Ashwaubenon, but-
but not in Ashwaubenon, not in the village. I think in a subdivision, the way I envision a subdivision, you can ride your bike on it without trouble.
Right, yeah. Yeah, but you may have a collector and arterial that may go through a subdivision. I mean, there's a possibility, and then maybe you would want an accommodation there because it's a main road going into a subdivision. But yeah, I just didn't see bicycle at all, I thought I would just ask.
Trying to get some cleanup there. Statutory changes, so improvements to subdivisions. This is required improvements. So this is where we don't have that right now, which is why we were kind of hung out to dry in Highland Ridge when we were asking to put in pedestrian accommodations. What I did here is I added in the red underscore, and then since this was sent out to you, Tony Wakowicz, our village attorney, had a couple additions in there in the blue, just some legalese. But what we have here now, so subdivisions lying in a sewered area will be required to have storm sewer, curb and gutter, street lighting with fiberglass poles and shoebox fixtures, sanitary sewer main and water main in all streets, and sewer, water, and storm sewer service laterals available to all in the subdivision. Sidewalks shall be required on both sides of any new streets, period. Okay. So that puts the developer on notice that sidewalks are required. Okay, so that's it. Boom, done. Okay. Now, following the village board direction that I received, they said we'd like to have some flexibility to vary that requirement as necessary. So what I have here to follow what they're looking for, the village board may approve alternative pedestrian accommodations. So again, pedestrian accommodations as defined, we talked about that, based on non-exclusive factors such as environmental constraints, existing development, or other related factors as deemed appropriate in the sole discretion of the village board. So the village board still has the ability to decide what they want, if not sidewalks on both sides. Okay. This is, and I put in here, this has to be determined at time of preliminary plat review. Again, that's where our approval authority really is. I've used similar language in other communities where they were dealing with the sidewalk wars. These are developing communities where, well, we put them on the north side and the south side at all. It comes down to it, just require them on both sides. And then you can back it off if you need to.
Yeah.
So again, the developer knows that cost up front. If it gets backed off, all the better for their financing purposes. So this is the approach that I've used in other places. It seems like this will hopefully meet what the village board is looking for. I think it accomplishes what Bike and Ped is looking for as far as what I heard during the Highland Ridge discussion. So this is really the meat of the amendment from a Bike and Ped standpoint. The other changes I had were, again, primarily cleanup for the statutory changes or timelines, things like that.
Thanks for putting all the time into it.
Yeah, for
so-
sure. Yeah, I like that, and I think, like you say, we know what we want, but it also has to be palatable to the board. And if the board has some discretion, that, to me, that would make it more palatable. So I'm happy that you did that.
So looking at the ordinance then, how does the developer know what size the road right away will be?
So that's,
Is there a table of that then somewhere else that they look at, or how
we
does
work with
that work?
Public Works on that. Typically, what 70-foot right of way is our standard. Now, that said, we have reduced it down to 60 feet. Alden Station, I believe, was 60, some variation there.
Woods Edge
Yeah,
was reduced.
right.
So the developer knows going in that, or they are thinking, just like they have sidewalks on both sides, that the roadway is 70 feet, is what they're doing a preliminary plat with.
Right, that's our,
right away.
I think our standard specification.
Or, no?
I'm just
Oh, I
jamming
know,
out.
I'm
sorry.
sorry. I wasn't paying attention, sorry.
Right, so they might start at 70 feet, and we'll take a look at that, and, the developer may say, you know what, we can't make it work at 70, can go to 60. It's a iterative process.
So do you think with adding sidewalks on both sides of the street, we should look at reducing that right away? Because obviously the sidewalks are gonna take up more of that, or to make it narrower road, or does that not help anything or make it more palatable to the developer? And less maintenance for us, less plowing, less cost when we take those roads over.
Mhm.
Does that help at all, you think, with the cost? Because if they're paying for sidewalks, then all of a sudden the road is maybe a little narrower too, so it's less cost for them.
That's something we talk about. I don't know, Doug, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, a number of the past or most recent past developments have seen narrower roads. Woods Edge, Alden Station, again, our most recent ones have narrowed with the narrowing of the right of way, the road narrows as well. Does it save time on plowing? No, it doesn't save any time in that location. The area I think that has to be looked at then is you get into some parking discussions.
Mhm.
Right now, generally speaking, in the village, residential areas, you can park. You can park anywhere. We just had some discussions down at Alden Station recently regarding parking down there. It is, when you narrow it up, not saying that it can't be, you do run into different types of developments depending on the amount of parking that's needed down there, where it can be an issue. And you have to start discussing if you're going to allow parking or not in some areas. So strictly just, it's additional discussions that happen during the process.
Out where my daughter lives, out in Moose Creek subdivision, out in Ashwaubenon, where it's, like you said there, where the road is narrower, there's just parking on one side.
So if we have an ordinance, were they allowed to make the road narrower for Alden Station? Or, okay, so they get approval to do that, change it.
So there's nothing
It's part of-
requiring a certain size then? They can work with you guys on saying, okay, I want this big or that big, or you guys can.
Right.
They come in knowing that typically it's a 70, in the residential area, it's typically 70 feet, but then they'll request based on, it can be environmental, it can be a number of factors. What we have left, like I said before, what we have left for development in the village are are some unique areas that have a lot of land features that might make it tougher to fit all of that and enough lots to make it financially viable to move forward. So then the developer comes in and says, well, we can make that work if we put a 50-foot right of way in and 22-foot roads, and we go, absolutely not. That doesn't work for us. And then it goes, okay, well, we can do 60 and maybe a 30 or 32-foot road. Okay, we can have this guy in it.
So it's kind of a give and take to a certain degree.
Right.
Okay. And that must be done early because that's a 70-foot right away versus a 60-foot. That's an expense to them, one way or
And
the
it
other.
has to be reflected on the preliminary plat.
Okay.
So whatever the road right of way width is reflected on the preliminary plat.
Okay, and that's really what it ends up being, because it's preliminary is kind of final unless something major happens.
There's some conceptual discussions with the developer prior to them submitting the preliminary plat as well.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of work that goes into
Right.
drafting the preliminary plat.
Yeah.
So they'll have those conversations ahead of time.
Okay.
Make sure they're matching.
I was just thinking if you're requiring sidewalks, it might be more palatable to developers if the roadways go in their work, because it's less expensive to them, but I wasn't sure if you required 70 or what the deal was with that, but it sounds like it's not necessarily required. It's kind of offered out as maybe this is what we do, but it could be changed. Or it could be adjusted.
The last bits of the village that fill in, we have to be flexible in how we approach them just because of the nature of what's left out there for the developer.
Any other questions or comments on the new ordinance? Thank you for doing that.
I guess I would ask if you're good with it, if you have a recommendation on this, and then I could bring it to Plan Commission at the December 7th Plan Commission meeting. I'd probably wait till the January Village Board meeting, just because December Village Board, like, is on the 14th, I think it is. I have a hard time just meeting the deadlines for publications.
Yeah, that's quick. All right, would someone like to make a motion in regard to this?
I guess we just motion to approve the addition to the code amendment, would probably be a better word than.
So I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second to approve the changes to the subdivision ordinance. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carried. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah. Well, sure. Looks like we made a lot of work for you bringing that up with all those changes I saw.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of things.
Our ordinances need to be updated every so often, just because of changes at the statute at the legislative level.
Like anything, you know. Get it.
All right, 8C or D, I guess. No, I'm sorry, I'm missing you out there. Information update on proposed 2022 budget bicycle and pedestrian projects. I don't know if it's coming from Rex and Doug or just Doug, or you can update us on that.
I'll give you a quick update, and I'll just kind of go to the board here so you see where we're talking about. This year we've.
Move my guy out of the way, so I didn't listen to you.
We want a PowerPoint.
Do you have a colored marker?
Easy, people, holy cow. There are a few projects that are carrying over from this year to next year, so I'm going to go through those first. So you have Alden Station. Here, come up here, and I gotta get my bearings.
Right, just to the top of the.
There you go. North. So we have the bridge that's being proposed to be constructed next year.
Oh, it is.
Over the creek. We have the trail in gravel right now. As part of that development, as part of the Alden Station development, the trail went in gravel through the entire site. It's going to sit in gravel until next year. Reason being is we don't want to pave that, and then as the bridge is being built, there's a landing that's going to be happening on the Alden Station side. That grade is currently being finalized as part of the design. We don't want to tear out a few hundred feet of newly paved trail and redo it. So as part of that design, of the bridge design, as that's finalized and that landing point is established, that will give us the grades that we need to do a final kind of design of that trail, get it set up and get it ready for paving. So we have that section of trail that will be going in 2022 with the construction of the bridge. West Main Avenue is currently under construction.
Yep, some of that.
Sand Acres, let's see, Sand Acres on down to Ridge Road on the south side.
Deserves a big feather in his cap for dealing with all the issues that are
Within the village, and it's no different than a lot of the other villages, but within Ashwaubenon, there is a plate of spaghetti under the ground in terms of different utilities. And over the past 3 months, we've probably met 3 or 4 dozen times with the various utilities and with the contractors and the designers out there. The most recent ones being, in order to build that trail, the creek that goes, comes through right about in this area, we have to do a culvert extension so we can put the trail over the top. That culvert extension, as you can understand, it has to be an excavation that goes down about 6 to 8 feet to put that frost wall in. They called in utility locates and a mysterious utility showed up there. And we spent the better part of about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks. Nobody said it was theirs. Nobody.
no one's.
We called Digger's Hotline and made up things saying that it was hit and there's an outage. Come out here right away to fix it. Nobody showed up. We tried everything in our arsenal to try and get somebody to figure this out. And all of a sudden, as they were going out there, and we were actually going to dig it up and snap it and just build over the top.
Find out.
Spectrum.
We'll find out real quick.
Spectrum called. They said, you know what? We show that we just have one utility line going through there, but what happens is once it gets close to the creek, it comes out of its conduit and splits into two, goes underneath the creek and then goes back in the conduit on the other side. That's ours actually. But it took 3.5 weeks to figure out.
After they had denied that it was theirs multiple times.
Now, I'm not going to spectrum. That's not the point. The point is that when you construct, I'd be saying the same thing if we were building a new road through that area. It has nothing to do with a trail, sidewalk, it's any type of construction. You run into these types of things that all of a sudden
Can't see it.
inflict delay. We're going to have basically everything done by this winter except the trail paving of that. We're going to be paving it next spring. There's a culvert extension, there's the retaining wall that's going to be going along the old trucks site. You'll see how they have it cut right now. This retaining wall will be going up against there. And then we have the concrete landings, if you will, the crossings at the intersections that will be going in next spring as well. The biggest thing is we're just getting up to the point that we don't feel comfortable putting asphalt in there. It's beautiful today. It's supposed to be actually pretty decent the next couple of weeks, but the plant's closed in the next few weeks here. And we aren't going to pave on frozen ground and things like that. It just makes for a bad product. And there isn't a need to have that paved this year. And they have a subpart project. So that's carrying over to next year.
Doug, if I could, so next summer when you're driving that trail and you come to Monroe Truck and there's a stop sign at the driveway, that was a condition that Monroe Truck put on in order for us to get the necessary right of way to put the trail in. They said, all right, we'll let it happen. We'll sell you the right of way, but we want to have little trail stop signs at the driveway. You know, it's certainly not optimal, but again, we don't want to torpedo the project just because of trail signs. So again, just kind of keep that in mind. What were they thinking putting these stop signs out here?
Does that help them a little bit though with liability?
I could see that.
Yep.
We just hope that the other businesses don't follow suit with that, like they don't recognize that in the future.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't have stop signs at every driveway.
I envision that though. You think about that pathway. So Bellin builds that, right? You get 450 employees, you got a development, the golf course, right? People are gonna buy those homes.
Yeah.
So they can hit the trail, then come up there. Now they still gotta go back behind, what's the big manufacturer there?
Green Bay Packaging.
Green Bay Packaging, and then somehow hook up, but they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it. They're either gonna walk it or they're gonna ride their bikes. So I don't think it's gonna go to waste, you know.
From Highland Ridge, from the new subdivision
Yep.
development.
Yep.
Yeah, they'd be able to connect onto the West Main, connect onto the industrial park trail up to Lobby Lane, and then take Lobby Lane
Sure. Oh, yeah, right, you're right. Yep.
Especially if that was plowed in the winter.
I wasn't gonna go that far. I thought of that.
That's what you really use it, you. Novel idea.
The good news is that's not part of this
He's
agenda.
he's looking for it in his notes.
He says, I'm not dealing with that.
Just so you guys know, it is in the budget right now. The plowing of the trails is in the 25,000 was put in, but they took out to prorate it, so starting fall of next year, it's in there to potentially start plowing, and I'm assuming it's the 2 trails, either Peckland and River, or the other 2, so it is.
So you
in
leave
the
right
budget.
progress.
Yeah.
Right, there you go.
Sorry, yeah.
Great.
Well,
That's
the
good.
last one carrying over to next year is Highland Ridge Estates Phase 1, the new subdivision development. They just started putting curb and gutter in this morning. And so the next week they'll be putting curb and gutter in. They're still hoping to get a layer of asphalt in this fall yet. It's gonna be a push for them to do so. That being said, they still have to get the curb, the grading done behind the curb, and then get WPS to put their utilities in. We don't want to be putting the base layer in for the trail out there when WPS is still going through letting utilities in. While we have seen or have heard neighbors mention when utilities go in, how the restoration, how the compaction goes, things of that nature. We want WPS to go in there, put their utilities in, let that settle out before the developer has it set up for the trail to go in next spring, which will then tie into, and we'll be finishing off the crossing at Sand Acres.
We just drove in there about a week ago. We can get back in there. Try to get an idea on the lots.
Are they in the pave that trail with blacktop or concrete? I know you talked about talking about making that trail concrete, or is it going to be blacktop? Or do you not know yet?
They've bid it out both ways, and they were looking at potentially doing concrete work. I don't know that the final decision has been made, but I thought that was the day they were.
Yeah, I think they were leaning towards concrete just because it's gonna be so difficult to get the asphalt paver. You know, jumping
Pick
the,
up between the driveway and then go again, and then go
They'd
again.
rather tie it in.
We can do it all at once and set grade based on the driveways and the finished elevations for each of the lots too, because that creates issues from an ADA standpoint.
Right. So they wouldn't put, like, if they're doing it concrete, let's say they do concrete, are they gonna put 2 sidewalks next to each other when they pour it, or are they gonna pour big slabs? Hopefully that's what they will do, instead of, like, I've seen trails where they put, 5-foot sidewalk, and then you have all these cuts in there. And that, moves all over the place and ends up being a really tough trail, and then weeds grow between it and all that stuff. So do you have any idea what they decided on that?
Yeah, the width on it, I can't remember though. Was it
10 feet?
8 feet or 10 foot?
yeah, I don't know.
Typically,
I don't know.
typically it's poured in one section.
Good, so it wouldn't be like 2
You'll have-
sidewalks sitting next to each other.
You're going to have joint marks.
Yeah, going
going
across
across
it,
it.
yes, I get that, yeah.
Typical construction is not to put 5 foot and 5 foot. You're forming full width.
That'd be great, I've just seen it the other way, and I'm like, it's not a good design. It just gets really bad. Okay,
So now hopping into 2022, there's one unique project out there that's it's a development project, and that's the general capital project on Mike McCarthy. Catching on Borban Avenue. And tying in to the village. This location here. If General Capital goes through with their project, their sidewalk on Borban Avenue going to the park, that'll be connecting in. That's a developer funded project. But in discussions with them, they'll be working with us more or less. We'll be constructing it or putting it as part of one of our contracts to construct. And then, for lack of a better term, invoicing them for the construction costs on that. But then that way the village can design it, and there's a kind of a dump off area into the park that would have to get laid out and discussed and things of that nature. So that'd be the first part of our project. We met up with some of our other projects that we're going to have going on next year. 2 of them being, and just met with the city of Green Bay last week. they put in a lot of utilities in their Legends District development, and next year they're starting with sidewalk development, and they have sidewalk that's going to be going by the old Freshwater Steakhouse and going in front of Merkel's one block over in 2022, and then 2023 and 24, they want to do the rest of the streets within the Legends District with sidewalk. So we have two connection points, one off of Mike McCarthy Way by LP Meridian on Bart Star Drive. And our other connection point to them is by the old Jersey store on Brett Bart Pass on the north side of the road there. So we have two sections of sidewalk to connect into that development in the future that we're planning on constructing next year. We'll be designing, that'll be a village design build, but we'll be following the same type of layout. They're in the process of designing just what the sidewalk and cross section is going to look like. They're looking at a 8 foot, I think they were talking an 8 foot sidewalk, maybe some treatments in the terrace area. So we'll match up with what they're doing in that area. We got to get that information just after the.
So if we don't have an ordinance for sidewalks, do these people give you, as a business, in the business district, do they give you, because most of the places have sidewalks. It's just kind of common sense to make sure you get sidewalks to go to Lambeau Field or to go to the rest center or to go wherever you want to go.
Well, yeah, in this case, the village is making those connections so that the businesses aren't. So yeah, we're putting those in to connect to the Green Bay sidewalk network they're putting into their Legends District.
Okay.
If there was a development up there, could you require sidewalks up there because it's a different district? Like, let's say there's a new subdivision coming in, or not subdivision, the apartment complex that's coming in on the north side of Mike McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
Are they putting sidewalks? Well, there's not any sidewalk there, so that's not a good example.
Right.
But could you, let's say we didn't have a sidewalk there, but we had sidewalks on the two parcels next to it. Could that be required then? Or are we saying our ordinance would not allow that?
That's kind of what I was asking.
It's something where we could recommend it. We could say, hey, look, this makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, please make that connection. But I don't know that we could require it per se.
So then our two sections of sidewalks up there will go in next year, even though he said someone will go to 2023 for Green Bay, but you're gonna put the one by Carpet Place and then the one on Brett Farm.
It's just a cost of
Just to do it.
little money as possible.
Okay.
If we can combine both at one time, get a
Okay.
little bit better price. So we'll have one that'll actually connect to something in 22, the other one will be, they're
Just
ready.
go- Okay, and then they'll
and
connect to it the
connect
next
in
year.
the following
Okay.
years. Last item I had is more on the maintenance end. We got a couple of them done this year. I still have one out to Martell Concrete Construction to see if they can finish off this year, but this is in regards to the signalized intersections. The study that was done earlier this year, about 8 intersections where there were minor concrete additions that were needed in order to make that easier for people to get to the head buttons and things of that nature. We've got 3 of them done. We've got 5 left. I have 1 out. So that means I got about 4 more for next year that we have in our maintenance budget to get done. And I'll probably team those up as well, since we have a pretty large concrete sidewalk program for next year. We're going to add all of those things under one contract, if you will, to make it as cost effective as possible. So we have, I believe they're on Oneida Street. They're don't hold me to these locations, but I'll say Oneida Street and Pilgrim Way on South, down Davis Road. I think it's those 4 intersections heading south, but we've got little bits of work to do. That'll get us basically caught up on all the easy ones from there. Then it's in the capital improvement plan, 1 per year. That's where you get into the big ones. If you remember over by Mary's Place, the talk was, we don't want just the sidewalk going to this. We want the head buttons pulled in, the wires rerun, things of that nature. Those are quite a bit more expensive, and those will have to get budgeted on a yearly basis.
Can any of those be covered with ARPA funds, do you think? Or not, like the bigger ones? Or do you think that wouldn't? And I know we get a bunch of ARPA stuff, already to look in the budget, but does that qualify, you think, or not?
Well, I know the park stuff was able to be covered, or a lot of it was because or at least some of the projects, because it's already in a current plan.
Right.
So the village was going to, you can justify the fact that the village was going to be spending their money on that.
Right.
You know, during the pandemic, if were not for the pandemic.
Doug has a plan for all the signalized intersections in the village.
I
You
think
know?
that'd be a little bit of a stretch. If somebody would question me saying if that is an official plan, on the court of law, I would say,
I
no,
need document.
it is not a plan of the court of law.
Come on.
Generally speaking,
I'm sorry.
infrastructure
You and Max could
projects
go
could
to
be-
jail together.
Yeah.
Generally
Yeah.
speaking, infrastructure can, it just has to be funded through what would be considered the loss of revenue calculator. So as long as you can identify that, had it not been for the pandemic, that you would have had the revenues to cover the cost of the project, then it can cover the ARPA funds. The ARPA funds can cover the project.
Okay.
Thank you.
And for those of you that haven't noticed yet, they put the bicycle fences on Cormier Road and then the bike lane, so from Oneida Street all the way to Ashwaubenon. Stencils went in, so thank you for putting those in front. So ready to go.
See that?
Yep. Have a good evening.
Okay, anything else, Rex, any update, anything? Otherwise we'll go on. D, request discussion on putting bike rack standards into ordinance form. Aaron, I don't know if you want to take that, or basically what,
Well, that's kind of yours. But I don't
Okay.
know.
Basically just trying to get into the ordinance that, when the bike racks are required, they should follow the APDP, bike parking guide. Because I think what happens a bit on it, and there's several in the community that you literally cannot use because they're up against a wall and you can't get your bike in. So then it would at least give them a guide on what ones to get, where they should be located, all of that. It just it'd be like if we didn't have any ordinances for parking spaces for cars. We just said, put in your parking spaces. We didn't tell them how wide they are, where they should be located, when handicap, how many handicap, all of that stuff. It's the same thing with bike parking. They need to understand where they should be, what type of racks are the best, and all that stuff. So this would just give them some information in regards to that. And then gives you a document that you can provide to them as well, or they can be required just to get and make sure that they're meeting those guidelines.
At present, there is not a requirement to provide bicycle parking within our code.
No,
No.
I know you referenced, I looked back in the minutes of your last meeting, and I'm sorry I wasn't familiar with it until I read that. You referenced the urban design guidelines, and there's something in the urban design guidelines, but those were just guidelines. That was never adopted in ordinance.
Okay.
So I think if, one way just to, provide a solution to this, either A, if we're gonna require bicycle parking for redevelopments or new developments, I think we need to establish some standards for that. How many spaces, how many parking areas, you have to kind of go the whole 9 yards on that. If you're not looking to require it, but simply if it's provided and follow the APDP guidelines, we could incorporate that potentially within the language. Should the developer or whomever provide bicycle parking, on-site bicycle parking, such parking shall conform to APDP guidelines. And that would be, so it wouldn't be required that they include bicycle parking, but they would, if they did, they would need to follow the standard.
I think that's a good first step, and, in the future, we can look into, do we want to have a standard bike parking? As I see more of these bike plans, these site plan documents come through, more and more often, they include bike parking. A few years ago, we didn't see it, but now I see more of it.
And they don't seem, do they balk because title almost on everyone says, depending on what it is, says, put a bike rack in. Do you ever get pushback on bike racks from the
Well,
developers?
again, it's a recommendation.
Right.
So
I mean, are they putting them in? Are they saying, I'll do it, or you don't know?
most of them actually are putting them in anyway. So, I mean, what I can do is, I certainly, as part of the, so once it's approved, I send out an approval letter that includes all the conditions of approval and the recommendations of approval. I can certainly send a copy of that document along with that approval letter if bike racks are a recommended condition. I mean, you think that would work? Can I send that out, or is it, I don't know if
This
it's
is a free,
copyrighted?
no, this is a free
Okay.
document that's available to anybody on the website, and they have it, so this, you want this? or
If
you
you can send me a link to it?
Sure.
No.
The other thing I just copied for you as well, there is a second edition bike parking guidelines, which is more in depth. That I thought if you guys don't have one in here, you may want to purchase it. This is one to purchase, it's like $45. But it goes into more specifics about it and gets into some of the Kyle stuff like Kyle says is more like indoor storage of like, made for employees or, covered storage and all that kind of stuff. So this goes into a little bit more than this document does. So it might be something just to have on hand if you guys.
I try to recommend that, and some apartments are already providing that.
Right. Yeah. So I know the new apartments at Titletown, they have tons of space for bike parking in their garage area.
Same thing at Bohemian Park,
Yeah.
phase 2.
Yeah. So I think people are more aware of it. So I don't know, but I'll pass that on to you if you're interested.
Okay.
But yeah, I can get
All
you the link for this. It's a public document, anybody can use it.
Okay.
Okay, so you're saying we do not have in any of our ordinances a requirement that someone has to put bike racks in. We just recommend that. And then if they're gonna go ahead and do it, then we can at least pass this and recommend that they follow APD guidelines.
Yep, right.
Okay. So then in the future, if we wanted to look at that legislatively, we could come back as a committee and say, okay, now we really wanna look at seeing this legislative, put this in our ordinance, because we think it's important enough that these new developments should be required to put these in and meet the standards that are set for the APD. Okay. Anything else on that? Otherwise, if we can handle it that way, that would be great. I don't know if we need a recommendation at all on that, do we? And Bellin Health, we talked about that quite a bit. I don't know if there's any, the only thing I have to add to it is, I know that it's not required now, unfortunately. And at some point in time, it would be nice to require sidewalks and pedestrian in commercial development as well. And I realize that's a legislative ordinance type thing. But one thing I have to say on this development is, it is in our bike ped plan. It's stated right in there that we want sidewalks on both sides of the lobby and we want sidewalks on this side of Oneida. And this development is not gonna include that. So I know that we just expanded the TIF to include this property. And my recommendation, and I don't know if it should be here or not, is that we ask the village board to put the sidewalks in on Lobby Lane and Allied using TIF funds from the TIF fund. And the village pays for that and takes care of those, because I think it's so important to get these in. And then the village also works with the state to continue that sidewalk north, and we just keep working up the way. But I just think it's such a key place that, people coming into there will literally not be able to walk out of there safely. I mean, they have that gravel trail that goes around, which is great, I'm glad that Mount did it, but it doesn't serve people moving through that area or people wanting to go up the street to all the restaurants, Starbucks. If you don't have that connection on each side, someone going to Starbucks literally has to cross 11 lanes of traffic to get to Starbucks. Ridiculous. It's the most unsafe place for a pedestrian is walking across the street, and we're gonna set them up to go on 11 lanes to get across to Starbucks if we don't continue that sidewalk to the north. So that's my recommendation. I've had it, I talked to I was out walking today, and one of my neighbors was talking about the development. He said, the other thing, Tracy, if there's people that work there that live in this area, they're gonna wanna walk to work. And how are they gonna get in there? During the winter time, those trails are not gonna be cleared, those gravel trails, they're not gonna clear those. So someone trying to get to Bellin is gonna have to walk on Wabi Lane. Do any of you wanna walk on Wabi Lane to get to that development? No, I don't. So, it's also being prohibitive to all their staff members that are gonna be there, that aren't gonna be able to get there if they choose to walk to that facility. And, his comment to me was, Tracy, they could live in our neighborhood. It'd be great walk. He goes, the reason I live in this neighborhood is my office is right down the way. I walk to work every day. And that's why I came here. That's why I live here.
And not only do sidewalks make the Bellin site accessible, they make all the businesses accessible.
Right, all those businesses up the road are accessible.
So it's not just a matter of people getting in and out of Bellin.
Right.
It's the people getting from Bellin to Steins and to the restaurants down there and.
Yeah. So, to me, it's an important connection, it's an important place. And then going out Allied, you're getting on the Parkview, which is a nicer road to walk on, to get away from Wabi. If that's a little busier, you could get, down to Parkview, and travel that way as well. So I just think it's something important and that we should think about another way to crack that nut if we can't get the developer to do it.
Well, especially if they're putting sidewalks in down here, which is a business district.
Right.
Bellin's spending a lot of money.
Right.
There's a lot of taxpayers gonna be in that building.
Right.
Working, hopefully living here as well. Right. When us old people move out, maybe they'll buy our home.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, and I don't, Bellin is a healthcare provider. And, maybe revisiting with them, and I know it's not required, I get all of that, but, they were willing to put a gravel walkway around their facility so their staff could use it, and maybe people that were sitting there and waiting for other people to get there. So maybe they would be willing, instead of putting the gravel along the front Wabi Lane section and the Allied section, like Kyle said, they help fund the sidewalk, because then they're not put their gravel piece in, because there's a connection there already. Their people can walk along there and they can still get out and move and all of that stuff. And maybe because they're a health provider, they'll think that's important. Because, people coming there, if they're not having that surgery or having it, their friend can go for a walk while they're having that done. So, me living in my proud and my optimistic place, but.
One of the pages of this 165-page document had a chart on the village saying, here's how many, based on the size of the building, here's how many parking spaces the village ordinance says. And the village ordinance says like 1,100 parking spaces, or 1,079 or something.
Yeah.
They're providing 750, which is fine because it's a 5-story building and the top 3 stories are just gonna be empty.
Yeah.
So they can have people in the first 2 stories. So the 700 spaces is enough for those two floors. But eventually, if they fill those top floors up, there's going to have to be some other accommodations for parking. And if people can walk to parking or bike to parking, that is going to be, this is a long-term thing, so eventually.
They'll just do like you see down, like you go down to Children's Hospital and down by, they're building parking ramps because they got so many people coming in there now. All these hospitals.
But if they build a parking ramp, you're still gonna have to walk to the parking ramp. I don't think they're gonna put a parking ramp on this site.
Yes, good point.
You're gonna, the parking ramp is gonna be.
You mean buy another building, take it down and put a parking ramp. Yeah. True. So in order to have this, do we have to make a motion to see if we can get the board to consider? Well, the board.
If you're, that's just my suggestion.
But how do you do that without having communication with them? You just.
Well, I think we make a motion to the board that we would like, park impact, or it's not park impact, TIF funds we use to put sidewalks in on the site on Wabi and Valley. We make that recommendation to the board. They can decide.
Oh, with no explanation, how do they know why we think that's important?
Well, Tracy will be able to explain.
Oh,
She's on the board.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Because if that comes before the board, they're going to say, why are we considering this? And the board members discuss it amongst themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's in the bike ped plan. It's.
Because how many
activity is
ridges?
planned.
I said before, I would love to see it go up to Ridge Road.
What I,
It's slated to be up to
The trail.
Richland on that side.
just, and to be fair and transparent to this process, I think what I would recommend, because certainly regardless of what tonight's motion may be, the sidewalk wouldn't necessarily go in a month, obviously.
No.
So what I would recommend is I would bring this item back, specifically identify it on the agenda as such. Because right now we're kind of talking site plan for Bellin. And this is somewhat, although related, it's still an exclusive
Right,
item.
yeah.
So just to be transparent and follow open records law, my recommendation would be to have staff bring back an agenda item for the next Bike and Ped Committee meeting that talks and deals with that subject in itself. A couple things that you'll want to note is obviously the scope of the project. So are you including all of Allied, Wabi? What are you including? Is Parkview behind there?
Parkview's behind there. Parkview has the
To
railroad
what
track,
extent are you going to follow this? Right now, I think it would terminate at the overpass or the viaduct, 41, but are you looking to try to make that connection all the way to the north, to the termination of the existing sidewalk? Because I think there's
Subway.
sidewalk that stops at Subway.
Yeah, it's where that crosswalk is, the south crosswalk that we had gone to check out on our tour.
So in any event, I would bring this item back as a standalone item as it relates to sidewalk in that area, or sidewalk within tax incremental number 5. Or we would identify it as maybe a project plan amendment for TID number 5, and we can kind of talk through it more.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we include Parkview on that too? Parkview currently does not have sidewalks or anything, but it has become and it is a major bike route.
Is that, the board's gonna look at funding, so number one, I think you personally, and I don't want to speak for you, but I mean, you can probably, because you were very creative on getting the Bellin site into the TID 5 district, is you need to look specifically at what is in that TID district, because then funds could be used to do something.
Right.
Anything out of that district, unless it's in TID, you got to come up with a whole different funding source. So the village board, in my opinion, would immediately axe that, because there's no funding for that, and there's other priorities probably.
But it's
In
in
terms
the
of
TIP district.
Well, I guess I don't know where that district is.
I guess in terms of,
The hospital is.
Parkview creates all sorts of issues just because of the railroad spur,
Right.
especially on the north side of Parkview. The railroad right of way goes right up to the street. I'm not sure, just from I also subscribe to the keep it simple, stupid methodology. That's my own methodology. I think the more that we can focus the effort on, if it's Allied, I get Allied, Wabi. I think the more you can focus on that, you can make that clear need for that part. I'm afraid that if you start throwing in Parkview, you might start to lose some people on it.
Yeah.
Well, I would think we would have to say, we would like these 3 things. We would like Allied Wabi, we would like Parkview, whatever we want. But we wouldn't say, here's what we want. We would say, we like these little things, and they can vote up or down on each one. They can say, this is a good idea, this one, not so much.
To me, the simplest option, least expensive for the mill, would be combinations on that site to the corner, to the intersection, getting across Wabi to the current trail system that we've got on the north side. Like that.
And they already require that as part of the development.
Right.
They're requiring that connection that's there by the gas station now. That'll get them to Allied.
I think that's Tracy's argument.
That's my argument.
You'd have to cross the street
Right.
at Allied by Quick Trip.
But
Walk underneath the
I'm going to
viaduct
say what the
and
village
then-
board will say, which is what everyone said regarding Highway 41 and the trail from Shady Lane to Cabela's, is, you're trying to save the fact, because it's just the argument, this is just what they're going to say. Now you're crossing the off-ramp of Highway 41 onto a 9th Street. And that is, there's not even a stop sign there. It's a slip lane that goes right through. And people are going to, you know what I mean? So there's also safety challenges going underneath 41 and across those off ramps as well. And then the DOT's got to be involved with that, which is part of what we do.
You can, there's a lot of steps to it. I just walked it today, and it's a challenge because you have that on-ramp, you have the off-ramp coming the other way, but it's been done other places, it's possible.
Oh, yeah,
It's,
it's
definitely
definitely possible.
And you just need to ask. I mean, they could say no, but you gotta move forward, you gotta try, and that's my thing.
Then you plant the seed. If you don't get it, but at least you planted the seed.
Right.
And to me, if we ask for a couple of things, because there's always, in my own case, I'm always kind of looking for a reason to say no to something if I don't like it. And if I can say no to one thing, well, I've at least said no to that, maybe I'll agree to something else. Maybe not. Maybe that's not the way the board works, but.
What is the TIF district? What are the lines?
It encompasses the old Menard site, Allegra Printing, the BP station, Microtel.
Okay.
And it goes across to,
It
goes across then to the Cars Guy and Subway.
Oh, really?
And then it jumps across basically to the railroad right away and north.
And regardless of the boundary,
Yeah.
you do have some flexibility to
Right.
work outside the boundary within
Okay.
so many
Half mile.
At least we got some guidelines anyway. So
So
what is actual?
I think ultimately we bring this back for the next meeting, talk about project plan amendments for TIP 5 related to bike and ped improvements. And I think that's certainly a reasonable topic of discussion. In fact, for many of our TIP districts, bike and ped accommodations and improvements are a primary component of the project plan. The West Main Trail, the efforts on Mike McCarthy Way, those are all good conversations.
Right.
A little bit. Tell me if I need to say anything or any questions.
Do you need to say anything or ask any questions?
Well, I mean, is there any
I
more on
think
the
we're done
agenda?
with item E, so I think we can move on to the.
Okay, do we need a recommendation at all?
No, we
to-
just put it on the agenda.
We're just gonna put it back on the agenda. Okay, great, sounds good. Okay, so go ahead, why don't you go ahead first if you have anything to say. We're just hanging up
The
there.
new trail in Sherwood Forest is great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Good. That's some good comments with that. We're still gonna do a little bit of planter bed walling, because that planter bed seems to spill out onto the trail between Shady and the pond itself. So we're gonna try and tidy that up a little
That
bit.
boardwalk is just super.
Yeah, it's a lot different than the other boardwalk. I mean,
That's
everything,
nice.
it's an improved boardwalk.
Oh, yeah.
And then tomorrow, I believe we're gonna be seeding along that trail with wildflowers. We've ordered quite a bit of wildflower seed, for shade and partial shade. And so on each side of that trail and boardwalk and where spots allow, we're gonna be planting wildflower seed, which will hopefully germinate in the spring and then add some color along that walk as the season goes on next year. So we're doing that.
Anything else, otherwise you can go. It's
Yeah.
better.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for the
DOT,
input.
nothing. Hey, Jeff, do you have anything? You've been hanging in there? No, you
He's
left.
gonna mute himself and we're just gonna hear.
No, I'm still here. No, I don't have anything. You guys have any questions at all? Hello?
No,
We're good.
no, we're good. We don't have any questions.
Thanks for
you.
hanging around though.
Hey, Jeff,
Yeah.
have you noticed the new lighting and making a difference up on the Holmgren Way section? They put all the new LED lighting in. I believe that's done now. Any difference, any brighter, any better up there?
Yeah, I think it definitely is helping. Another thing that definitely helps is during Packer games, they now changed it, that they actually block that completely off, the same as they do with Oneida Street.
Yeah.
So that really helped with when there's a lot of pedestrian traffic down there that it's actually no traffic going by. So that's actually one of the benefits of it that we didn't really look at, that we're gonna with not having cars going by, just with the pedestrian traffic is a lot safer.
Good. Sounds good. Anybody have any other questions for Jeff? Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for hanging in there.
Yep.
All right, item 10, public comments on biking and walking. Anybody have anything else to add in the community?
Teresa, I was gonna add your comment about the striping on Cormier in this section, is that okay? You talked
Sure.
about this. And
Yeah,
what
for
was
the
it? Just
stencils, the bike
Stencils,
bike
sorry.
stencils. The other thing, I don't know if you, for those of you that live over in Southwest, almost all those railroad tracks have been repaired, which is a godsend.
Very nice.
They're really nice, and Doug was really good, and he got Parkview done also. Parkview.
Oh, really nice.
So much better now.
Yeah.
But it's still a skewed park, it's still a skewed railroad.
Well,
You have to
you
be
gotta-
careful going around it, going across it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Doug and I are debating on is I've asked for skewed signs on that crossing because it is a hazardous, it's a tough crossing for bicyclists, and it also lets motorists know that a bicyclist may be merging out into the traffic lane because they have to get lined up properly. So this is kind of a warning sign that can go. It is an optional sign. It is not required, but it's recommended for skewed crossing.
She put one down in the pier on Broadway too.
Yeah, well, Broadway has the bike lanes, and when they cross that, they have the bump out area, so you do not have to go onto the travel lane. You can do that. But so it's different because they made a combination so you don't have to go in the travel lane to go through. So my recommendation on this, and I've talked to Doug and he says they're not gonna put them up, is these needs to go up, and Bellin's gonna be located there, and they're gonna bring a lot more traffic, and it's a warning sign for all. And there's other warning signs that are already up on Ashland Avenue. There's one on Ashland Avenue where the railroad crosses. I'm trying to think where it's at. It's kind of on the south end of Ashland, I think.
On Ashland.
Yeah, so they are unique. And there's a history of crashes here. I could probably tell you about a dozen people I know that have crashed on these, and now they're better. So hopefully you won't have people crashing. And it is a major bike route. So that is me on my soapbox. I would like to see our skewed crossing sign go up on that.
What was the first
It's not emergency.
location where they repaired them that you spoke of?
They've repaired them in a lot of the
Okay.
Southwest Business Park area.
Okay.
So there's a whole bunch of roads out like Ashwaubenon Street, I think, and Ramada Way and Glory. They did it on Glory too, which I think they did that extra because there wasn't road construction there. So there's almost all of them in that area they redid, which is like the greatest thing because they were all bad. So. Okay, next bike and ped meeting is scheduled for, I don't even know what the date of that would be. That's it on here. December 13th.
Wow.
Yeah, it's already December. Anything else? Otherwise, I would welcome a motion to adjourn, and thank you for hanging in there. I know it was a long meeting, and Matt, I think, was.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second, anybody?
I'll second.
Second, Jessica. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
I just want to thank Aaron and Joel. I say this, but it's true. I appreciate your support because that, with your knowledge, helps us, right? We didn't have that before. So, and Aaron, man, when I looked at it at first, I'm like, whoa. Well, I didn't have to do that.